Thank you all for joining us today for our discussion around ROI with Microsoft AI within the financial services industry. We truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to engage with Revanti. Revanti is a Microsoft partner that has a team packed with expertise in all things Microsoft. The team at Revanti is ready to help organizations deliver a more collaborative, more productive, and more secure experience. A few housekeeping items today. This is a live event that is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording with each of you. If you have any questions on any of the content presented today, feel free to enter them into the Q&A chat, and our team will take action to help answer them. Our speaker for today, David Brown, comes loaded with a deep wealth of knowledge around Microsoft's tool sets and its impact on end users. And I know, in fact, I guarantee you will walk away with more insights on how Revanti can help your organization achieve more with Microsoft's AI capabilities. All right, enough from me. David, the floor is yours.
Hey, Shane, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for your time. Really appreciate it. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we've seen in our experience within the financial services industry, specifically around what organizations that see ROI from AI are doing. So we've deployed a lot of Copilot since Copilot became generally available a few years ago, and have deployed pilots and production rollouts in numerous different industries and verticals. But financial services presents some unique use cases and challenges that deserve some special treatment. So hopefully I can cover off on some of those today. And we've actually won an award and some Microsoft recognition for our work with Copilot and AI deployments. And so I thought I would just share and pass along some of what we've learned so far and some of what we see fairly routinely. And apologies, I'm getting over a cold. So if you hear me sniffling, that's the reason. So we'll run through a number of different topics today. The first is the too long didn't read, sort of teeing up the conversation at a very high level, some of the themes that we'll be discussing. Then I want to take a look at that MIT NANDA paper from last June and talk about what was good in it and what was bad in it as well, and how I think some of the methodology and findings were flawed, but also highlight what seems to be durable and persistent lessons learned and takeaways from that article. And then I'll talk about what we've seen succeed, both in terms of approach and hopefully provide a couple of just interesting use cases that might be relevant to folks here. And then talk about what a good AI partner looks like. Hopefully the conversation up to this point will make clear that the deployment of AI and Copilot specifically is less perhaps a technology deployment than it is sort of a business process inspection. So it sort of changes a little bit what partnership might look like. And then we'll talk about one of our Copilot offerings and how we create pilots and organize those for success. And then, of course, any Q&A. So moving right along, basically, we're going to look at a couple different characteristics of financial services organizations. First, obviously, we want to key in on the ones that have successfully demonstrated ROI. And based upon that ROI and that value that's quantifiable, have then moved from experimentation and pilot into a wider and broader production rollout. So have sort of crossed this chasm between experimentation to operationalization, and production rollout, and how they've used this human plus AI as assistant, so human in the loop, to then go on and continue that journey to the frontier, basically an agentic workforce, many agents working in coordination and collaboration with each other. So the short story is, those bars below, how are organizations doing this? Well, vision's important, and I don't want to minimize that, but quickly they're sharing a track record of demonstrable success, quantifiable success, rather than focusing on that vision. That's really tangible to the organization and the folks in control of budgets, in control of technology, et cetera. And that track record really consists of finding narrow, high-value use cases that prove out ROI. And that's all being done in a way that's not a massive process re-envisioning, but really done in quick sort of iterative cycles, 90 days or less, so that we can prove out some value and then go on to create some plans for wider rollout. And the formula sort of there at a super high level is, baselining what existing work looks like today in terms of, say, accuracy, time to completion, quality, et cetera, piloting that and training folks to that with an AI assistant, and then measuring that AI assisted new number, and then iterating on that. So we'll get more into that. But I called it the elephant in the room because even though the paper is almost a year old, it really does still color how a lot of my clients approach us and some of the concerns they have, and I think rightfully have, specifically about, we're hearing about a lot of organizations failing to see value and failing to move past a pilot phase to do something more meaningful and tangible and transformative with AI. So this is that MIT NANDA paper that caused the markets to shed billions of dollars literally overnight. And the main title is the GenAI Divide. And essentially the GenAI Divide is basically, as it's written there, it's that gap between early experimentation, between investigation and pilot, into something that's scalable and production that delivers real business value. So it's that step from the first and second sort of bars to that third and final bar. So here's what I think is maybe flawed about the study. This is the attention-grabbing headline that made it on Forbes and all of a lot of business periodicals, et cetera. One of the conclusions of the paper was that 95% of organizations are getting zero return. Very startling headline, very attention-grabbing. What I think was short-sighted or flawed about some of the methodology was, first, the study was conducted over just 6 months, so 2 quarters. And success was really defined as bottom line profitability or measurable P&L impact. Now, I've been working with cloud technologies since they were in beta almost 20 years ago. I don't recall any technology whose value or utility was measured in terms of a P&L impact, but over just 2 quarters, especially in emerging technology like generative AI. So I think that time horizon is too aggressive, and the P&L impact maybe misses some important middle steps, which we can discuss. Secondly, the study overwhelmingly contained more build than buy scenarios. And by this, we mean an organization has decided to do a sort of an end-to-end process revisioning. They are not buying products that other vendors like Microsoft or Claude or ChatGPT are providing. Instead, they're building their own LLMs or models and doing an experiment that way. Those are very long, more than 90 days. The paper highly recommends against that in its conclusions. But that was where most of the attention and most of the respondents in the study were doing. So it was already a bit hamstrung in the first place because by their own admission, this is not the best approach. And lastly, it was a small sample size with very limited quantitative data. So the interview happened over 6 months again with just 52 organizations, maybe a little tough to extrapolate over, not industry specific. And they were conducted by survey to 153 senior leaders. And we'll talk more about this in the coming conversation, but these senior leaders were often C-level executives who maybe don't have insight into the day-to-day workflows and processes which AI was being used to assist. So all they have is anecdotal and perhaps subjective impressions of how that's working. And then if you couple that with, until I can see that on my P&L, I'm going to assume I'm getting zero value. It's a pretty tough criteria to satisfy. So I think this big scary headline, I think, involves some scrutiny because of these items here. Now, what I think they got right was quite a few things, and I think that these themes continue from last year into this year, and in fact, I'm assuming I'm going to see them in 2027. Based upon the conversations that I'm having with folks. One of the insights is success is less a function of model quality than it is of approach. And by this, the paper itself points out that, a big part of the GenAI divide is caused by learning and integration failures, not model quality or access. So it's hard to keep up, even for myself, whose day job this is. But, these models are being measured on these very granular, incremental model measures where millisecond response times or other very sort of technical measures are putting one above the rest. And that's changing at any given point, every week, perhaps. But if you were to take it as a whole, these models aren't too wildly different from each other in terms of their capabilities. I liken it to like F1 Formula cars, where those differences in terms of times and finish times and speed and all the metrics you'd expect are so negligible that really, it's less about the car, more about the driver. The second area that the paper identifies as being an absolute requirement to bridge that GenAI divide is finding narrow but high value footholds where we can expect to see ROI. So this is measuring not operational outcomes, this is measuring operational outcomes, not those model benchmarks like we talked about in that first bullet. So the trick is identifying where AI can be inserted into a process or a section of process that is either low value in terms of human effort or judgment, but is time consuming, where we can optimize that process, get some savings back, meet some KPIs, and see some ROI, and do so quickly, again, within less than 90 days. And similarly, small visible wins and then expand. This is sort of the idea that we're trying to create a track record rather than reiterating a vision. And to do that, any tools, particularly off-the-shelf tools, human and assistant tools, are perfect for this. because there's very low sort of setup overhead, typically low integration overhead, and we can demonstrate fast time to value. That certainly would do better than building something in-house and having that take a long time, only to find that we're seeing negligible sort of improvements there. And then where do we do this? Maybe partly this is because of the P&L focus, really revenue generating sort of front office activities, maybe top of funnel activities. But a great place to find these high value use cases is really back of office functions, where you can increase, say, the throughput of your team by introducing AI to certain elements of that process, and eventually that whole process itself. And those are pretty immediate, rather than, say, doing something with, say, a sales organization or a go-to-market organization that has cycles that, say, span across 2 quarters or take a quarter to complete. So that's really back of office functions is a great place to look for those high value use cases. And then lastly, your partner should behave less like SaaS sellers and more like BPO consultants. And we'll get into this, but this is an interesting point in my mind, because me myself am a consultant in this space. So what have we seen succeed? And by that I mean specifically, what organizations have we seen successfully move from pilot, be able to coherently demonstrate and report on value and a return, both quantitatively and qualitatively, in order to get the sort of buy-in and support to then move forward to a production rollout, either org-wide or through some sort of non-trivial segment of the organization. And so basically making that leap that we see here. And I have that quote again, just to keep reiterating that point, that there's small visible wins within narrow workflows, and you start to serialize those and expand that track record, but also expand that AI assisted footprint. So some pitfalls I've seen, and they come up fairly often, are a few things. Under-supported rollouts or over planning. So this is sort of two sides of a similar coin. Under-supported rollouts means that perhaps 24 executives were given licenses to some LLM, and they've been told to, play with it and see what happens and give some feedback. And typically what will happen there is 2 things. First, less important than the second. The first thing that'll happen is executives will do just that. They'll take a look at it, or IT will take a look at it, try to incorporate it in its work. But after, say, maybe 2 weeks or so, they lose interest, or maybe they hit a wall, or find that they could be just carrying out the work better and faster than it would be to, do some prompt engineering or modify and refine those prompts. And then they lose interest. And the conclusion is AI is not worth any further investment. But the more important issue with under-supported rollouts is if you were to give, say, 50 licenses to your executive team and ask them to have at it, those folks are operating in a silo, and those folks are really using AI as a personal assistant rather than a human plus assistant. And by that I mean their use of AI is detached from, or often detached from, actual processes and workflows that are often repeated in the organization, and where you would actually find a lot of value at scale if you could start to optimize those processes with AI assistance. So by giving it to folks who operate in a silo, you're not actually seeing what AI can do in processes and workflows where that value is actually unlocked and would be meaningful when you start to scale it out to, say, the 250 folks who work with, your anti-money laundering due diligence team and who are doing, SAR reports often or enhanced due diligence to conform with AML activity, et cetera. So those are the issues with the under-supported rollouts. Then the over-planning is really folks will sometimes bring very complex use cases that could not be easily, say, written or mapped out or diagrammed on the back of a napkin. And so it's already very complicated. It's probably involving different integrations that, the complexity of which is not fully understood. And it is already sort of too clunky to sort of fit in a nice 90-day time frame in which to quickly sort of understand, are we seeing value here or not? So that's sort of under-supported and over-planned rollouts. But then we also see folks putting autonomous before assistive. And this is a perfectly reasonable impulse. But they're talking agents before we're talking human plus assistant. And agents, again, probably involve some development activity, probably involve lots of requirements gathering, probably involves lots of integrations and data coming from a variety of sources and, data transformation, et cetera, et cetera. The autonomous route, the agentic route as your starting point is probably too advanced to be able to quickly and confidently demonstrate that there's real value to be had before moving forward. And then, similar to that, the build first versus buy first, same vein, going agentic before going assistive, the end-to-end process revisioning. This is a problem. Folks want to, say, take on a whole, say, credit reporting workflow end to end, rather than just saying, let's just insert this document summation or this document creation in this part of the process, or where's the bottleneck, rather than going end to end autonomously led. And then again, bespoke modeling techniques or development, anything like that, it's going to take a lot of resources in terms of people, developers, et cetera, and has no guarantee of showing ROI. The last thing I'll just mention here too is the other interesting thing about P&L impact, which I actually ask folks a lot of times who say that is, is the goal here to reduce headcount and the labor force? Because that's where you'd really see P&L impact in 2 quarters. And almost universally, everyone's like, no, the near-term goal is not to reduce our workforce. The goal is to allow our already constrained workforce to get more throughput and to do more, and to do it with better quality, better accuracy than what we're able to do now. So, that's another thing to consider on that point. So what's worked? It's sort of the flip side of those pitfalls. It's assistive before autonomous. So sort of a crawl, walk, run program where we start with human in the loop and we develop those capabilities and skills and actual sort of backlogs of opportunities before moving to autonomous and agentic and frontier landscapes. We're looking at, narrow use cases rather than entire processes. And it's aggressive, disciplined experimentation where the discipline is really baselining, efforts and outcomes pre and post AI assistant. And then, of course, letting those who do the work lead the way and become makers and start contributing to the pilot experimentation and the building out of use cases. Because, of course, they're the ones that are involved in the day-to-day work. So just keying in a little bit on one of these lessons that we've seen and that the MIT paper expressed as well is assistive before autonomous. And I don't want this to feel like a taking away. I really have seen it many times over that this sort of stepwise approach, starting with human plus assistant, so something like Microsoft 365 Copilot, is a part of the frontier journey and will actually accelerate an organization's ability to become agentic. And so first we start with human plus assistant, then we can take some of those learnings and move to create agents. And then from there, we can create many agents that are getting oversight from humans. So phase one, however uninspiring, which I don't think it is, we're not reimagining work or fundamentally changing people's roles. We're really looking to make their existing work more efficient, higher quality, less error prone. So what does assistive look like? It's, as general intelligence, AI is not purpose built. So, there's a lot of technology, almost all technology is purpose built. I know what email's for. I know what my applications on my phone are for. That's less clear with GenAI. So because it's not purpose built, it's also not immediately clear, of course, how we will use it. So empowering the team that does the day-to-day work and that oversees and is responsible and accountable for the day-to-day work, empowering them to identify those areas where there may be bottlenecks, where we think there's low value or low judgment requirements, where we think there's low risk in terms of, say, the data that's being reasoned over, or what happens if there's an error. By having those folks identify and surface the use cases, that's where we're best going to be able to identify those high impact, meaningful ones where we might have a chance of seeing ROI. So to sort of round out, how does assistive get us to autonomous? We've again seen this over and over. And I'll give you an example, an actual example from a financial services organization. But essentially, giving teams, say, Microsoft 365 Copilot, and giving them some heuristic or some idea about how to identify meaningful, high-value use cases, and getting them to work on that is actually provides critical, it sort of de-risks moving from phase one to phase two. So a great example is, and I'm looking here, so we work with a regional bank. They support a lot of businesses in their metro where they operate and in the state where they operate. And, they have anti-money laundering due diligence activities that they need to do whenever transaction activities flag something as requiring that. And they do this about 250 times a month. And this is, they have some transaction data, they've got some internal banking information, but they also use some internet resources as well to do this enhanced due diligence for AML. And this process can take, upwards of 6 to 8 hours for each case. And again, they're doing it 250 times a month. So what happens with this team is this AML team starts to insert the M365, human plus assistant into the process training and prompt stacking Copilot to carry out initial drafts of these findings and these summaries, and seeing how they can reduce the time. And of course, they are looking at accuracy. It's still going through the same vetting. The outputs are still going through the same vetting process, but those times are getting reduced in half, if not more. And as those prompts get refined, and as that group gets more and more comfortable with the outputs that it's receiving, now, and I'll just switch here to this other slide, now it's all ready to go to, say, development, either low code or pro code, to become an agent that the entire department and group can be using and trained on to take that AML process and compress it down while preserving or improving accuracy and throughput. So the idea here is that, these groups of users are almost like little product managers. They're often working together in collaboration with each other on a single set of prompts, right? Because you can publish these prompts, they can be shared, they can be tested and validated, and they're being optimized. And by the time that group is comfortable and happy with the outputs it's receiving, you basically have everything you need for that development work and that agent development to take place. You've got the requirements, you've got the specifications about what that output should conform to. You've got the proven ROI because we baselined what that AML process looks like pre and post AI. And so then this is a much different conversation to take to your leadership, let's say, with data in terms of like ROI, AI assisted hours, accuracy improvements, whatever those KPIs and benchmarks are with that process, to then ask for, can we have resources to create these agents to then operationalize and sort of codify the work we've done with human plus assistant. And this is much less prone to failure because you've already very quickly, agilely, and iteratively worked out all of the issues to get to that output that you're wanting. So we do find that, human plus assistant, which is different from a personal assistant, it's lower cost, it's lower risk, it's faster time to value, and it ultimately creates this development pipeline where you've now queued up multiple portions of processes that could become agents. You've got metrics on the value that's being extracted from that by introducing AI into the process. And then those are just very sort of shovel ready in terms of requirements, documents, et cetera, to become developed. So, uncovering the use cases, that's really the key here, in my mind, to get started. We mentioned, AI not being purpose built. Your users, and typically how we approach this is will need to be trained on what the capabilities are, what the limitations are. One example is even an individual contributor, when using Copilot for portions of their work, they sort of shift from I'm an individual contributor to now I'm a manager. I'm doing task decomposition for my prompting. I'm critiquing the work. I'm iterating on the process and the outputs, etc. And I'm validating that they're accurate. I don't let it go out until I've had a chance to inspect it, just like you would for any sort of, say, junior resource in your group before sending something to one of your clients or customers. And so we'll make this available as a follow-up here, but basically what I've done, let me just move this over. We've developed just a little bit of a rubric here. So here are sort of some high level descriptions about, here's some places you might find some high value use cases. Is it repetitive and rules based? Can you jot it down, the process and the workflow, relatively easily on a whiteboard so that we can then go on to mimic that and understand each of the steps involved? Does it involve multiple dependencies or just a few? The fewer, the better as a starting point. Structured inputs, etc. Low privacy or security risk. We certainly want to start with the lower risk items first as we build that track record. And then I have the actual scoring rubric here. Hopefully you'll find this useful. You can change how each of these three categories are weighted by business value, integration complexity, and enterprise risk. But basically, we want things that have high business value, low complexity and risk, as you can imagine. And then we've got, you could fill that in as you're having discussions with your team about what possible use cases we might have to insert some AI assisted workflows. We would have sort of the heuristic at work here, identifying what's opportunistic and maybe what's a phase 2, phase 3 to tackle, but we would know what we would want to target right out of the gate. And then, we've got some baseline metrics here, which will be all important when developing your quantitative sort of analyses of this pilot activity. And then we've got some sort of forecasted targets. So for example, if I can create regulatory change impact statements and summaries, if I could do that in 40% less time, what might that AI assisted value be? So this is sort of how we structure and try to identify in a way that's data informed which use cases will be the best to target at any given point in time. And then these use cases, as mentioned, will often then go to a separate board once we're satisfied with the outputs for agentic development. And awesome, now we've got our pipeline of agents, and now we are meaningfully on our way to becoming a frontier organization. And so this is just a reiteration of that in terms of the rubric and the scoring mechanism. I've seen this done a number of different ways. This is one that made sense to me, but something that's capturing, much of this detail is basically our approach and recommended approach to use case identification. So given all of that, finding use cases, digging into processes, business processes in order to find those use cases, having the sort of discussions and interviews with the people responsible for and carrying out the work, given that that's sort of the real work of AI pilots and AI deployment and getting value from AI, what then does a good AI partner look like? And this is not so much Ravanti specific, although I do like to think that we sort of live and breathe this approach. This is really for any AI partner you might be considering or currently working with. But essentially, you see the two sort of verbatims there. Organizations that cross that divide don't approach AI procurement as if it's a piece of software with a set of features that they're buying. They approach AI as if the AI tooling itself were like a BPO and not a SaaS piece of software. So on this table here, just a few sort of differences about, like, if you were to look at it through that lens, sort of SaaS software versus business process outsourcer and consultant, what would that look like in terms of approach, perspective, et cetera? And really, you can see that. So BPO is in some fashion acting as a change agent, inspecting the organizational processes, structures, constraints, bottlenecks, et cetera, to develop a better process, to ultimately be able to own that process and be responsible and accountable for that process. Whereas a sales executive at a SaaS company, really, it's about the deployment of those software and features, enabling folks to get onto the platform, use the features, understand the features. Much different when we're looking at AI. Success is also differently measured, and I think that's very clear just from the discussion so far. We're not talking about active use metrics, although that plays a part. We're really talking about throughput, quality standards, quality KPIs, measurable improvements to the process, whether that's sort of, less revisions required, faster time to completion, et cetera. So I'll just leave that there. I won't get into each one here. But essentially, a few hot takes here. Your AI partner as a BPO consultant. The take here is, a good and I think effective AI partner should behave like a BPO consultant that happens to use and enable AI, rather than a SaaS company with the same sort of playbook and approach that happens to sell AI. And I've actually pulled this slide up for some clients of mine, and I've seen some heads nod, and we've even had some discussion in it. And it's certainly meaningful to me and something I'm passionate about, because these conversations are the interesting conversations for me personally. These are the fulfilling conversations and the fulfilling outcomes to achieve. But when we approach AI deployment as say a BPO consultant, now we're asking all sorts of interesting questions about, well, which process will be owned by AI, or which part of the process will be owned by the AI? Who gets that call if that process somehow breaks? Or, the one that a lot of folks actually key in on is, where are your most expensive people doing the least differentiated and least valuable work? Where is the work that doesn't require a ton of experience or judgment or a point of view, and is perhaps more synthesis or research based, where we could take those really good, expensive, smart folks and just have them manage the outputs rather than create the outputs? So those are great questions to ask, and those are ones that we typically ask as a part of sort of that organizational analysis and use case identification set of discussions. So Copilot Pack 365 is Revanti's Microsoft 365 Copilot pilot offering. And essentially, this sort of fits into the process right where we're on that precipice of the GenAI divide. Right as an organization says, we want to experiment and trial Copilot to see if we can get some demonstrated value out of it and get enough information from that experience, that pilot experience, in order to make a go decision to move forward with a broader production rollout, whether that's, say, the next 5 departments or whether that's organization-wide. And so that's really what this offering is designed to do. Just 2 notes here. I mean, this offering, this pilot of Copilot, really has 2 work streams that run concurrently. The first is the technical readiness or the security work stream to ensure that data that Copilot indexes and reasons over and then returns to users is appropriate for the permissions and access that the users have. So I'm not, the classic example is I'm not getting payroll information from board members and executives as a junior analyst in my responses. But also, too, we can scope what Copilot does index and reason. So there's this user level set of data security permissions, and then there's this Copilot level of here's what you can index, here's what you can't. That's the technical work. But then there's this adoption and change management work, which is really about facilitating those use case elicitation workshops, identifying and getting consensus from our clients about where we think high value use cases are that we want to pilot, providing bespoke training on, this ALM process or this credit application, decision summary process, this is going to be handled by AI in this way, and we're going to train you on how to do that so that we can baseline, measure, and report. All of that comes in the adoption and change management piece and is really the heart of the pilot activity. So there's three very basic objectives to what we're trying to achieve when we pilot AI and specifically Copilot. First, we want to give users the support and training and enablement they need to productively use the tool so that we can sort of responsibly and thoroughly assess whether it's had an impact on ROI or not, and what we might be able to expect and forecast in other use cases. So we want to get that good information. I guess I would just put this up against, this is not assigning some licenses and having folks experiment and play with it on their own. This is identifying slices of process, training on that, and then having the folks who carry out that process carry out the pilot. Second piece is the evaluation. So we will get quantitative and qualitative information that will be summarized in a way that should provide all the information you need to make an informed decision on whether or not to move past pilot with a broader production rollout. And then third, if that answer is a yes, we're moving to production rollout, what's that license rationalization look like? Honestly, there's a few ways in terms of Copilot to handle that. Maybe not every user needs M365 Copilot and the corresponding license. Maybe they're okay with Copilot Chat, which is free, versus Teams Premium, which gives folks transcription and meeting notes and summaries for their calls, versus, no, this is a deep information worker who needs to have Copilot reason over a good amount of organizational data in order to carry out those processes. So just some sample deliverables here. We do the task assessments. We're identifying use cases in a number of different ways in terms of which applications that training and that work is taking place in. What are the KPIs and sort of broad categories of AI capabilities that are being used for those use cases? What is the prioritized use case, as you can see, similar to that heuristic and that we're identifying, as well as the KPIs themselves and some of the themes. So this all comes from sort of this initial discovery and business analysis to identify those high value use cases. And this is something we typically do in about 12 weeks. So within that 90-day sort of threshold, where we can not only have a chance at showing some value, but doing so quickly. And these are actual results from a 1,600 seat customer. Over the course of 1 month, these 61 pilot users had 747 Copilot assisted hours. And we determined the average hourly rate for this specific department. This was at $72 an hour. So 747 hours at $72 an hour turns into about $54,000 worth of AI assisted value. And then, we're obviously looking at that in terms of the upfront investment and return on investment and forecasts for the other activities. But then we also have qualitative results. Again, this would be part of sort of that summary that would allow organizations to make a data-informed decision about whether or not to move forward past pilot. And there's confidence scores in the tool. There's, scoring and discussion around, has it been helpful and would you recommend? How would you feel if it were taken away, etc. So I know that was a lot. I hope you found it interesting. I'm sure there's specific questions for each organization. So happy to answer any of those. If not now, you're welcome to certainly book some time with me, and I could get into more discrete use cases that we've seen in financial services. But really do appreciate the time and hope to talk further.